All right, so I believe this is recording. Um, Here we have three problems that they want us to determine the value of c that will complete the square and then factor the expression. So notice that these three are not equations. We cannot solve expressions. We solve equations, we simplify expressions. Um, so here the technique in this completing the square is to first make sure that the leading coefficient is a 1. So in all three of these problems, I can see that they've given me one that does have a leading coefficient of 1. Now I focus my attention on this middle term and the coefficient of that middle term. And so if we call that a, b, and c, I'm going to take the value of b and divide it by 2, and I'm going to square it. And that's going to be this c, okay? So if I take negative 20 and divide it by 2, I get negative 10. And negative 10 squared is 100. And that's my value for c. That's what c is always going to be. So we just found the first part, the value of c. Now, let's write that out. We've got x squared minus 20x plus 100. And we have to factor this. Now, if you want, you can come in and do this x method every single time or look at it. But the reason that we chose 100 is now that I can quickly factor this by saying, well, this 2 has a base of x, and half of negative 20 is negative 10, and I'm done. Okay, so it wanted two things: the value of c, that's 100, and it wanted us to factor it, and there it is factored. We're done. All right, so let's move on to the next one. And again, we're going to do the same thing. To determine this value of c, we look and we take b and divide it by 2 and square it. Okay, so b is 22. And half of 22 is 11. And 11 squared is 121. So if they gave me the expression x squared plus 22x plus 121, I can factor this in a heartbeat because that 121 was specially designed that I could come in and say, this is the binomial. Half of 22 is 11, so this is x plus 11 squared. If you don't believe me, multiply it out, Or if you want to, like I say, take the time to do the x method, But look how much faster it is when I recognize that this c is equal to half of b squared. All right, so now this next one is a little more difficult. The formula is not changed. The value I want to pick for this c is to take half of b and square it. It's just that it's now going to be a little bit more challenging for some people to take negative 3 halves and take half of that and then square it. All right, well, let's focus our attention on this negative 3 halves for a moment. And remember that this fraction bar means division. So suppose I rewrote it like this. Now remember, once we get this answer, we're going to square it. I'm hoping that when you see that division symbol, that it triggers something in the back of your mind. Don't you remember doing this in elementary school, that division is the same thing as multiplication by the reciprocal? That you, instead of dividing by 2, that you're going to multiply by 1/2. Okay, so now when you learn about fractions, and the reason that so many people dislike fractions so much is more because addition and subtraction are challenging. Multiplication is extremely easy because you just multiply the two numerators together and you multiply the two denominators together. So think about what this exponent of 2 means. It means that we have negative 3/4 times a negative 3/4. And we multiply the numerators together. Negative 3 times a negative 3 is positive 9. And 4 times 4 is 16. So that was a little bit more work to just find this value for C. But really that's because I wrote it out as step by step as I could. You know, with today's calculators and how easily they can handle fractions, I don't think it will take you this many steps to look at negative 3/2, take half of it, and then square it and get 9/16. All right, so what does that do for us? Well, that means that if this value of C were this fraction, 9/16, and you gave me this x squared minus 3/2 x plus 9/16 and said, hey, I need you to factor that, I would say, well, no problem. It's x minus 3/4 quantity squared. Because look here, half of negative 3/2 was negative 3/4. Okay, so I'm done with these three. I know that number 9 is going to be more challenging for you, so you may have to watch this a couple times and you may have to practice a few of these that have fractions. But the ones that are even numbers, you're going to find that those are the easiest to do with the arithmetic. The ones that have odd numbers or that are fractions are going to be a little bit more challenging. Hope that helps, and I will talk to you later. Bye.